Hello and welcome back to IT Camps. I'm John Weston with Microsoft, and in this session of IT Camps we're doing about Windows Server 2012. In this particular session we're going to drill down inside of Windows Server 2012 and take a look at the IP address management, or what we call for short IPAM. Our agenda for this session is to describe what is IPAM, or what IP address management is all about. Why should you care about it in your business environment? And then finally we'll take a deep technical overview, as much as we can in the short amount of time that we have, of what IPAM is all about and how you install and configure it. So what is IP address management? IP address management is a built-in Windows Server 2012 feature. It's actually a framework for discovering, monitoring, auditing, and managing IP address space within our corporate network. As we all know, we've got IPv4 and IPv6 networks out there, and we need to manage the IP address ranges. We've got DHCP servers, we've got DNS servers that are all handling out and doing our name resolution, but we need to manage that IP space. And so IPAM, the new feature of Server 2012, allows us to be able to do that. As you can see, some of the top features here of IPAM, it does automatic IP address infrastructure discovery. So it allows us to go out there and monitor all the DHCP servers, the domain controllers, the DNS servers within our domains that we choose to want to manage. We can also then do custom IP address space display, reporting, and management. We always get asked by auditors, how many IP addresses are we using? What are our available IP addresses? And then if there's any discoverability capability, we need to go out there and have the information to know what kind of IP addresses we've been using on our network. And then the audit of server configuration and server changes, as well as tracking usage of our IP addresses, is becoming more and more important in a secure environment in our networks. Monitoring and managing of our DHCP and DNS servers is also critical. Making sure we appropriately hand out IP addresses, as well as appropriately hand out name resolutions across our entire network. So why are these kind of things important to you, or why should you care about IPAM in your network? There's several challenges that IPAM addresses that you probably already have in your existing network today. First off is IP address planning. Managing your public IP address space, as well as what are you using for translation and what do you use internally for your IP address scheme. We all know we're running out of IPv4 addresses, so how are you efficiently using the IP4 address space that you have today? Address allocation, managing both your static IP addresses for all those servers, routers, and switches out there that have got hard-coded IP addresses that you need to have a good inventory, a great audit capability of understanding. And then how are we going to allocate on demand? Making sure we've got the appropriate resources in DHCP out there to be able to handle the demand of the clients. And then finally in this section we need to look at dynamically updating DNS. It's not just enough to have your own DNS servers and point them out to the cloud, but to be able to make sure that you're dynamically updating the ones internally. IPAM also allows us to be able to track the usage of our IP addresses and the utilization of those. Helps us in capacity planning for IP addresses in the future. And also helps us identify issues when we go to troubleshooting. What if we're having a problem with a DNS server or DHCP server, and helps us isolate those issues. And then finally for audit, it helps us log all the address changes that we have in IP address scheme and keep up to a 3-year history of information about how IP addresses have been used. So next let's take a look at a little bit more of the technical under the covers of how IPAM really works. So some of the basics here. This consists of an IPAM server as well as an RSAT client, so that allows us to be able to manage these tools. This is an in-the-box feature. It's free. It's part of Windows Server 2012. It's available in all the SKUs with one exception. If you install this server as just a core server, the IPAM server is not going to be there. Your Windows Server 2012 server does need to be a member of a domain. It cannot be installed on a domain controller. So it's kind of interesting. It does have to be part of the domain, but you shouldn't run this service on a domain controller. And by default, this service is not turned on, so you do have to go out and install it. The client to this runs on the RSAT client, which you would run from a Windows 7 or Windows 8 client, and it also runs directly from the management tools on Windows Server 2012. This allows us to be able to monitor and configure all of our DNS services and our DHCP servers. Now wait a minute, that's Microsoft DNS and DHCP servers. We don't manage other third-party DHCP and DNS servers. This allows us to manage both our IPv4 space as well as our IPv6. Now in IPv6 there's some limitations, and we'll talk about those when we get to the specifics in the end of this section. There's a couple of different methods to deploy IPAM, either a distributed or a centralized model. We could do one IPAM server, or we can deploy multiple IPAM servers in a distributed environment. So this is a great overview architecture slide of exactly how IPAM works. So we've installed a client out there on Windows 8, and it uses the WCF framework to be able to communicate to the Windows server. So we can have our administrators and our users of the IPAM service to manage our DHCP servers, our DNS servers, our domain controllers, and our NPS servers. Notice that all the information that's gathered is stored in a Windows internal database that's stored on our Windows server. So this slide goes through the process and explains the workflow and provisioning and discovering capabilities of IPAM. We start over on the right with you, IPAM administrator. The first thing you're going to do is install the service or provision an IPAM server. You then go out and configure the scope of discovery, how far the domains and what roles in the services you want to go out there and discover. We then use a group policy object to deploy the IPAM commandlet to the individual clients. We then click on Start Discovery. That gives us a list of all the servers on our network. And then we select which servers that we want to go out there and inventory and the roles that we want to manage, such as DHCP, DNS, or domain controllers. We then add all those servers to the group policy objects that we want to do, and it starts discovering it. So as you can see, the servers that are managed down here in the lower left-hand corner, including the DHCP server, the DNS, as well as the DC and NPS services, and you can see all the different event logs, services, who's accessed them, and everything are all be able to be inventoried. So here's a couple of screenshots of how you implement an IPAM server. I go to Server Manager, IPAM Overview, and provision a new IPAM server. It's going to walk me through the server, walk me through the wizard to do the deployment. We then go out and use a group policy to provision that server. Notice here that gives us the PowerShell commandlets to invoke IPAM GPO provisioning is the switch that we want to use, and you pass it the parameters of what domain controller and all the individual items that you want to do. You can see the syntax for this PowerShell command here. Next, we want to talk about IPAM address space management. We have address blocks, we have ranges of addresses and individual IP addresses that are assigned by DHCP, by IPAM for static. It just depends upon the life cycle of the individual IP addresses. Some clients, for example, have a lease that might expire in a few days and then they need to renew that lease. Whereas we want things like our servers and our switches and our hubs and printers to have hard-coded fixed IP addresses. And when you can use IPAM to manage those static IP addresses. Once we've got IPAM up and running, this is a screenshot of what it looks like to manage it. It goes and shows us an inventory of all of our IP address, details of selected IP address, and here notice I can filter this information because obviously this database may be very large by geography. So I can filter it by just printers, just endpoints, just servers, and I can add or remove and import addresses as necessary. I can also manage blocks of IP addresses. Let's say, for example, I want to create a range of IP addresses specifically for my servers. This allows me to be able to allocate those specific static IP addresses separate from the DHCP servers. The next thing is I get a little bit more complicated here where I can manage some of the things inside of IPAM of managing the IP address range management. So here I've got some basic configurations of from this IP address to that IP address, but notice you can get very detailed in the custom configurations that you can control. Lots of other fields normal that aren't covered by DHCP that you can control with IPAM. IPAM also works with your DHCP servers to create reservations for IP addresses. So for example, we want to be able to give an IP address a default IP address so someone makes a reservation for that. So here the DHCP makes a reservation. This can be created directly through the IPAM server. Or the reservation can be made by the DHCP service. Notice it then shows up in the DHCP console. IPAM also works with DNS record creations. So here notice we create a record for a new server, creating an IP address and the name resolution in IPAM. And then notice on the right how that information shows up in the DNS console. So it's a centralized location to manage those IP addresses. Another great feature of IPAM is reclaiming IP addresses. So we all create those scope or ranges of IP addresses that are handed out by DHCP servers that never get utilized. So it can go out there and search across all of our scopes in our DHCP servers and understand where we're not getting utilized so we can reclaim those IP addresses and use those elsewhere within our network. IPAM is also a great tool for monitoring your IP address tracking on your network. As you can see from this screenshot, we can get down to very great detail about the leases of the IP address, filter by IP address, export this information out to a text file or to an Excel spreadsheet. It's a great tool to hand your auditors in case they want to be able to get information. And remember, we keep back up to 3 years of information of all your IP address leasing information. So now I'm not going to read all these great details here, but just a couple of points about the things that you need to know about IPAM. This only supports Microsoft-based DHCP and DNS servers as well as our own domain controllers and the network policy servers. Must be domain joined but not run on the domain controller. It is only in a single Active Directory forest, so we can't have IPAM servers crossing forest. A single IPAM can support up to 150 DHCP servers, 6,000 scopes, 500 DNS servers, and 150 DNS zones. And as I mentioned several times earlier, we support up to 3 years of forensic data on your IP addresses. We do support both IPv4 and IPv6. We'll take a look a little bit later in the next video about a demonstration of how to set up and configure IPAM. But until then, take a look at this screen and follow some of the links, and you can go download IPAM as you see from the TechNet articles there, and gives you a great overview. It's a good white paper about the features of IPAM. If you want to install Windows Server 2012 today, here's a great link for you, aka.ms/HWWS2012. You can get a free 180-day evaluations of Windows Server 2012 and go try IPAM for yourself. So now let's go and take a look at the next video on how to deploy IPAM.